Good morning to you. It is 14 minutes past 9, and every Thursday we take a little dive into the history of London, some of the things that we just didn't know. And Stephen Walsh is the editor of London Calling blog. Stephen, London is literally calling. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here with us this morning. You're going to take us through a little bit of street art in the capital, which is obviously all over the place. We see it. Difficult, though, because it comes and goes.
Yes, it does. I think that's the ultimate beauty of street art, the ethereal nature of it. Like all things in life, you have to enjoy things while they're there because they might be gone tomorrow.
Well, that is very, very true. All right, talk us some of the history of street art in the capital.
Well, graffiti, the predecessor of street art, and the lines between the two are very blurred these days, began in Philadelphia in the late 60s and then spread and became very well known and famous in New York in the US during the 70s and 80s. And by the mid 80s, a couple of well known films, Star Wars and Wild Style, as well as a book by Martha Cooper and Henry Chalfont, Spray Can Art, was published in Europe. And that kind of really set the tone for graffiti becoming a thing in Europe, and including London during the 1980s. It's interesting to think that back in the analog age, it took someone to publish a book for graffiti and street art to take off the way it did and be shared with a wider audience, compared to the digital realm we live in now, which is fantastic for the medium, where everything can be shared in real time. But these films and these books really sort of brought this new subculture to a wider audience, and it really took off in London through the 80s. Graffiti crews like the Chrome Angels being pioneers of what we're seeing now. I suppose by the 1990s, street art in its more figurative form has started to form. In the wake of stencil artists like Black Lorat in Paris and Shepard Ferry, Giant Obey paste-ups and stencils in the US during the early 80s. So by the 90s, London scene started to take off. Artists such as Sweet Tooth and Deface painting their works around predominantly Shoreditch and Brick Lane, which is still considered quite a hub, even though it's mostly full of adverts these days. And then I suppose by the late 90s, you've got the most famous street artist of all, Banksy,
right,
starting to paint all over the country and in particular East London. I believe he had his first exhibition in Shoreditch around 2000, 2001. And from then it's just exploded into a art form that you can see all over the city, all over the country. Tiny towns and villages are having street art festivals. It's everywhere now. It's a global movement.
How does it work? Because graffiti is seen as vandalism, street art as art, but who gives permission? Do the council have to give permission? If it's a private building, of course, that person can, but on other buildings, does it always have to be private? If someone does something beautiful, because it's not just sprawling graffiti, will the government or the council, the local council, allow it if it's pretty enough? I don't know. How does it actually work?
Oh, that's a great question. Ultimately, it depends on the area and the borough. So, for example, we run a project in South East London, and it's not been done with council permission, even though they are supportive of what we do. As far as I'm aware, in most parts of London, at least, you just need permission from the property owner. Right. So long as it's not offensive or features nudity, excessive violence, is overtly political, then they can't actually remove it. It's down to the owner, really. They're the main crux of who has the power in this.
Right.
But by the same virtue, if someone painted something that was considered beautiful and non-offensive on a wall illegally, the owners can still get the council to remove it.
But I mean, if the council like it enough and it's pretty enough and everyone loves it and it's enhancing the area, I would imagine, and I realise it's hard to say if everyone loves it because art is subjective, but I imagine the council aren't then going to pay hundreds of thousands to remove it from the brick when it looks really nice.
You'd think not. Again, it's ultimately down to the owner. In the same virtue, as long as it's not overtly offensive, if the local community don't really like the art, but the owner does, they're stuck with it.
Yeah, but I mean, if someone does something on a public building for something or a council-owned property.
Well, you'd think so. One of the good things about the rise of community projects is that they are saving councils a lot of money and time. I know the project we run, that we look after all the spots we have, and we remove any vandalism or replace the artworks and keep it looking fresh and interesting. More councils are starting to embrace that, but I think that's happening elsewhere in the country and less so in London. You're seeing like the rise of street art festivals and big projects in places like Leicester and Cheltenham and elsewhere. But London, I still think a little bit behind, or the council don't really have to initiate such projects and tasks because street art and graffiti is just going up everywhere anyway.
Well, stay with me there, Stephen. I'm going to play a track, but I have so many more questions for you. We're talking street art and the history of it in London. I'm going to play you a little tune. It's Sigrid with Don't Feel Like Crying. It's Sigrid, Don't Feel Like Crying. Hopefully no one does this morning. It's 9:22 and I am joined by Stephen Walsh, editor of London Calling blog. We're talking street art. Stephen, I have to say I'm on your blog and there's so many pictures of it, and it's very beautiful. Some of all of them are extraordinary, but there's some incredibly beautiful pieces. And I wonder if I saw those pieces in frames in a gallery, I would love them so much. I don't know if there's something about these huge bursts of colour and depiction amongst the concrete jungle that makes it even more compelling.
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly the charm and beauty of it, brightening up the unused space. For me, the thing that instantly drew myself to street art is the democratic nature. A lot of people aren't going to go to galleries. They're not going to have time. They're not going to want to access those sort of spaces. Street art is the most inclusive form of art there's ever been. It's there for anyone who wants to take notice and engage with it. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. And it's just there for everyone.
It is stunning. I wanted to ask you, because of course, like you said, Banksy is the most famous one that everyone kind of knows about. And I'm looking through these pictures on your blog, and I appreciate I don't have an artist's eye. I'm not a curator of art, or a history of art even. But a lot of them are stunning. They're no worse or better than what Banksy does. Why has he risen to such prominence? What was it about his work that captured people so hugely?
Partly time and place. It was sort of, it wasn't necessarily new. People were doing it before him, but he really, as you say, captured everyone's attention. I think a lot of it with Banksy is a combination of the humour and the message in his art, and he always had a really good sense of placement. So generally someone who would paint illegally, at least historically, if not now, he'd always make sure his art was put in the most suitable location to go with the theme of the subject. And I think that's quite exciting.
And I mean, Banksy's work is quite political.
It can be, but it can also be quite social and humorous. I think there's a good mix in his art. There is a lot of politics, as you say, but I wouldn't say it's exclusively that.
Okay.
Or when it is, he can put a fun twist on it. And I think that can make it a bit more palatable and accessible to some people. Do
we have any Banksy in London?
We have 5 or 6, I believe, that are still up. The thing is, when he paints, they tend to either get defaced, covered in perspex, or most likely removed from the wall and sold for a small fortune at art fairs around the world. I believe there's still one in Poplar. I think there's one in Mayfair that's still up, the falling shopping trolley one. Yes. There's 2 in Shoreditch.
Okay.
But yeah, they are few in between, and he doesn't really paint too much these days around. And there's one at Barbican as well.
Right, yes, okay. Well, yeah, imagine if someone paints a Banksy and it's on a private property, it's on your wall, you would want to sell it, make what you can off it, wouldn't you?
I mean, I can see where there's a temptation when there's much money involved, but street art's for everyone. I don't think that's really fair decision for any individual to make. It's been painted in the public realm for people to enjoy. But I suppose that becomes a bit of a grey area if you're painting illegally on someone else's property and they don't have a say in the matter.
But I like your point about it being a democratic basis, because you're so right. Art and galleries and, high art, as society is to call it, is closed off to a lot of working class folk. It's something that, it has been kind of kept behind gatekeepers and the upper echelons of society. And there are loads of galleries that people, I know working class folk who wouldn't want to necessarily go around it, wouldn't feel comfortable, wouldn't enjoy it. There is a snobbery and an elitism to it. Whereas, like you said, street art is there for I guess, the masses and the people.
Also, galleries tend to dictate what can be considered successful or good art, whereas when it comes to painting on the streets, as long as the artists are getting themselves up regularly enough and painting about the place, the public will decide what they like, who they enjoy seeing, who becomes famous. So I think it's a better platform for that genre of artists to promote themselves and potentially succeed.
And there's a lot of birds. Why? I've looked at so many robins, sparrows. I'm looking at some herons now. What's the situation with the birds? There seems to be more birds than anything else.
My guess is because a lot of the stuff that's been documented on my blog of late is artwork we've produced in our local area for a project we curate. So, and I guess you're looking at artworks by a gentleman called Aspire, who's one of our favourite artists and lives locally and is always brightening the area up for the town.
Aspire loves a bird. Absolutely loves a bird.
He does. But his work also, you'll notice alongside the birds, there's lots of everyday objects, part of our like food we consume, plastic toys. It's always put in the context of nature against man-made life.
Well, I'm looking at another Aspire bird on a toothbrush. There you go. Stephen, what is your favourite piece of street art currently in the city?
Oh, that's such a hard question.
I know, you've got to pick one, my friend. I'm sorry to put you in this position, but here we are. Give me one. If you were to say to listeners, or do you know what? I'll tell you what. I'll make it easier for you. Give me one piece that listeners right now can go and see in North, South, East and West.
If you go to outside Poplar Station in East London, there's a giant chihuahua by Irony and Bow. It's just so fun, so well executed. I'd recommend that for all.
Okay, fine. Just that one. That's the one to go to in East. Have you got any recommendations for South?
Well, yes, we run a project in Penge, South East London. There's over 210 artworks up across Penge and Annerley. It's the largest project in the entire UK.
Okay.
And we've got great murals from local artists and artists from all over the world. Off the top of my head, one of my favourites would have to be some tiny photoreal stencils by a gentleman called Dotmaster. It's impressive to see a stencil artist paint photorealism with stencils. And I'd also recommend it in South Kingston upon Thames. There's a great project there with over 70 artworks up currently. There's one
always on Wardour Street, isn't there? I think the artist Dreff originally had one there.
Dreff did have one there. I believe there's a gentleman called Jim Vision for piece up on the Wardour Street wall at the moment. Dreff's got a few other paintings floating around. There is one in Penge. I believe he's still got one up Seven Sisters Way. His art is incredible with a great focus on promoting strong Black identity.
Yes, beautiful art. I walked past a beautiful mural street art in West London in Chiswick, just off the High Street yesterday. That was lovely. What about North? Give me one in North.
Oh, there's not as much art in North London these days. There's a few good pieces still floating around Camden Way.
Oh, of course there is, yes.
I'd say up near Seven Sisters Road, next to the paint shop, there's a great painting by a Salvadoran artist called Abraham.
Lovely.
Who paints grayscale portraits with a combination of spray paint and emulsion and rollers. I'd say that's my favourite artwork in North London currently.
Wonderful. Stephen Walsh, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been lovely chatting to you.
No worries, thank you.
Stephen Walsh there talking all about street art, the history of it in London. He's got a blog, londoncallingblog.net. So head over there to have a look at what the pictures I've been looking at. They're all gorgeous. It is 9:30. Let's get the latest update on the traffic.